Elizabeth. We often hear modesty for women, but as a man that's intentional about his faith, I'd love to know more about how the brain of a woman works around attraction towards men. Seems like we rarely hear how men can be more modest and how we can dress in a way that is manly and attractive, but that upholds the dignity of the women in our lives as men. This is a fabulous question. I really love the idea that you can take ownership over what's in your control, your life, your body, your clothing, those sorts of things, but being mindful of the people around you and wanting to help, not lead them into states of temptation. So the reason that we often hear a lot more about feminine modesty as opposed to masculine modesty is because of the way that women and men's brains work when it comes to arousal. So men are much more visually stimulated. I feel like any man watching this doesn't really need me to explain the nuts and bolts of that, whereas a woman might. So all that I'll say is when men see something, that just seeing it can be arousing, right? Whereas women very often are I don't know if this is the actual term, but reactionarily aroused. I don't think that's the right word. But basically what I mean by that, I might have just made that up, is that it's not necessarily what they see that can arouse them, although it does happen sometimes and some women are more sensitive, but it's more like the interactions that kind of get them to a place where they are aroused and ready to go. So with that in mind, you don't often hear about men's physical modesty being as big of a deal for a woman's heart. And actually we've heard a lot more about emotional modesty, emotional chastity, those sorts of things, emotional boundaries, because those are the sorts of things that can stir women's hearts when men are not emotionally prudent with the women in their lives. And that's the sort of thing that can be, I feel like that would be more of a comparable thing. It's men are more drawn to the visually stimulating, but women are more drawn to the heart disclosure. And I feel like that's where we kind of even the playing field around how we discuss actions and behaviors. But because this guy wanted to know about masculine modesty as far as clothes and stuff go, we'll go ahead and talk about that. So the first thing that I would say is when we're talking about modesty, I think when we think about virtue, it's appropriate to think from the morality of authentic happiness as opposed to necessarily the morality around rules. Because rules matter and rules are in place because we have a loving father and he wants our thriving and he wants our flourishing, and he recognizes that sometimes our hearts aren't in the right place. Often our hearts aren't in the right place. And so the rules are what help to keep us on the straight and narrow that lends toward happiness. I'm kind of thinking of the analogy of a young child who sees fire and they think it's really pretty and they want to touch it and explore it with their hands, but they don't yet know enough about it to recognize if I touch that, I'll get seriously hurt. So parents put a rule around it that's just don't touch that. And sometimes you can explain, most of the time the kid won't understand. They just have to know and respect the rule. But as they get older, that rule of just don't touch fire becomes insufficient. They need to understand for my happiness, I don't want to get burned. And so because I don't want to get burned, one of the ways I don't get burned is by choosing not to touch that fire, right? So it's when I was a child, I think like a child. Now that I'm an adult, I think like an adult, which is a butchering of something that St. Paul said in the epistles. So the idea around modesty is rules are fine. And sometimes rules are enough for a season, but we ought not to stop at just the rules. We need to be focusing on the heart posture. So in particular for this fellow, what I would say is we need to focus on the heart posture that leads to authentic happiness, which is he's kind of on the way there, right? I want to love and serve the women in my life, and I want to help to uphold my own dignity and help them to uphold my dignity, etc. So what can we do to help foster that, to help understand the dignity of the body, help understand the dignity of man? Honestly, broadly speaking, I would say study theology of the body. The riches and the gems that John Paul II has given the church that flesh out the ever ancient teachings, but in an ever new way, are really helpful, because if we can understand the ideal that we're striving for and we understand the core of the dignity of the person and the dignity of the body, then it becomes a lot easier to make the choices that rules would protect, but then you'd be making the choices of your own volition, I guess. You don't need the rule to tell you what to do. So I would say to start, really work on studying theology of the body and understand the beauty and dignity of the body, and let that then motivate your choice of what to wear. Because the more that you surround yourself and you saturate your mind with the dignity of the person, the less that immodest things are clothing, etc., are going to be attractive to you, right? The more that you put yourself in a state where you are able to be exposed to the truth and goodness and beauty, the less you're going to want things that aren't true or good or beautiful. So the other thing that is kind of the elephant in the room that I want to address is how this pornographic culture has affected our understanding of the body and has like desensitized us to what is appropriate. It used to be, because of this visually stimulating thing, that men were primarily the people who were exposed to pornography. I'm thinking particularly before the internet was a thing, and it was like magazines like Playboy. And I don't know that you would necessarily call like strip clubs pornography per se, but it's that same kind of like you have to go to a place and like engage in this behavior. It's very, very different than what has happened with internet pornography. And I feel like back in the day, although I don't have research on this, so maybe this is not true, but my gut tells me that there were less women involved in it when it was not on the internet. But now that it's on the internet and it's everywhere and there's all sorts of kinds of things, and also like the prominence of like romance novels and erotic literature that put like sexually explicit material in the context of like the emotional love story, which is what women need a lot of times to feel aroused, is that kind of emotional context that draws their heart in, and then the explicitly physically arousing things come much more well received if your goal is arousal. So like the rise of all of that, which again, I don't know when romance novels came about. Maybe they've been around forever. I don't know. But at least we'll talk about this place and time where it's very prominent. It's very accepted. I did a video recently about like nudity in film. You got all of that, which is like the sexually explicit stuff in the context of a love story, if you will. And so it's much more easily received by the feminine heart. Like with the rise of all of that, you see the issue of kind of male modesty from a physical clothes perspective becoming a much bigger issue, because women are much more kind of desensitized in a sense to the sacredness. And so they're going to be much quicker to be aroused. So I just want to throw that out there. I mean, to this person in particular, he's talking about the other women. And of course, he can't control how other women look at porn or don't look at porn or work on all of that stuff. He can control himself. So for you, sir, I would say work on not looking at porn if you do. But to everyone at large, like not just this question asker, like one of the things we can do to help with modesty boundaries and help with our heart posture is like reduce porn consumption. So there are lots of ways you can do that outside the scope of this video to talk about it, but just wanted to put the modesty conversation in the context of like kind of how we got, not how we got to this place because it's been around for a long time, but one of the big pieces of this modesty puzzle. Okay, but what everyone, maybe not everyone, what a lot of people come to my videos in particular for is because I am always going to give it to you straight from a practical perspective. Let's talk about the things that men can do that are immodest. So a lot of this depends on kind of the context that you're in and what your heart is wanting, but some things to consider are if you are shirtless, that is not necessarily a bad thing to do. Context matters a lot. But if you are shirtless because you are wanting to arouse someone, right? If like the reason that you're wearing just swim trunks at the beach instead of like a rash guard is because you want people to notice your body, okay, well, that is something that I feel like you should take to prayer and emotionally think through what your motivation is for wearing those things. I would say same thing is true with people who like let their underwear hang out of their pants. Not sure how many of those people are going to be watching this video, people who tend to that fashion choice. But hey, you never know. The internet is a weird place. Maybe this has come across someone's desk and they like to wear their underwear hanging out. Well, when your underwear is hanging out, your underwear is like a sacred, if you think about it this way, is like a sacred gift that you would give to someone who would be around you when you're naked, right? Because like you take clothes off, then you take underwear off, and then you're naked. So if you're exposing your underwear to people, perhaps that is the sort of thing that would arouse someone and needs to be thought of. Keep your underwear to yourself. And maybe a woman wouldn't necessarily be aroused by that, or maybe she would, I don't know. So that's something also to consider. Like I said, with the shirtless beach attire, exercise attire, those sorts of things. If your pants are particularly tight, and the reason that you're wanting your pants to be tight is because you want the women around you to notice like your tush or something, that is another thing to consider. Like, why are you wearing those clothes and what is your motivation behind what you're putting on, etc. So as you're thinking about this, like when I list off the number of clothing items that may be immodest for men in our current fashion age versus women, obviously the list is a lot shorter for men. Part of that is because of cultural norms. And culturally, women have been pushed to wear really tight, really cut, like low cut things. But also it's because women have two areas on their body that are like precious and reserved for marriage and family life, which is their breasts and their lower parts. And men have only one, right? This lower part area. So I think that when you're thinking about that, that also ought to come into your mind. Like make sure that all of your precious genitalia are covered by your clothing. But like, so don't wear too short shorts, but you don't often see men wearing short, tight shorts. If you are doing that to arouse the women around you, perhaps don't. I think I see it more in like jeans, like super tight fitting jeans than I see in shorts, but hey, shorts are your jam. Maybe consider having them be an appropriate length and bagginess for your, to uphold your dignity and make sure your heart is where it is, or make sure you're mindful of your heart and where it is as you're making these decisions. The other thing that I want to address, which isn't necessarily modesty from like a sin perspective, but he mentioned like how to dress in a way that's attractive and kind of upholds my dignity as a man. I want to talk about like mass attire. So what you wear communicates a lot about how important something is. And it is amazing to me that I see people so willing to dress up in really, really nice clothing for like a wedding, but they're wearing pajamas to mass. And what that communicates is mass is not as important as these other things. And I think when we take a step back, we're able to clear, if you understand what mass is and you understand that Jesus is present in the Eucharist and all that stuff, you can understand like, oh yeah, of course that's really important. But our dress does not often signify what we feel on the inside. And that is something that I do think kind of falls under this modesty discussion, not in the sense of like it's making someone sin, but in the sense of how is my clothing reflecting my heart, right? Like how is that external reflecting the internal? And so I really, really wish that I could see like a revival of people wearing mass clothes, like Sunday best to mass, right? Wearing nice pants, nice shirts, even suits and ties, if that's something that you're open to doing, wearing nice dresses that are, primarily reserved for special occasions, mass being one of them for women. So one of the things I think you can do that communicates to the women in your life how important mass is and how important mass is to you is dress accordingly. So like if you don't have a suit, go get one. Or if you do have a suit, but you only wear it to like weddings and special occasions, make mass a special occasion for you. So that is another thing that I think is really worth a discussion here, not from an arousal perspective, but from a like positive, perspective of like, how can I best communicate the dignity of my body and the dignity of what is happening around me. So those are my thoughts on male modesty. Please drop your comments here. I would love to know what you guys have to say about this. And of course, you can message me on Instagram at @discerningmarriage. If you want to continue this conversation or you have questions. I've had a lot of people be doing that from my YouTube videos about bikinis, which is, I guess, part of this conversation, and the like nudity in films. And I have loved it. I've loved hearing from you guys. So please feel free to do that. And until next time, stay close to the heart of Jesus and be not afraid. Bye.